Content types and information management policies are two features that are often used with a records management strategy. While these features can be used with other types of content, they're especially powerful when used with records management. Information management policy, I can apply a different set of actions to a file before it becomes a record and after it becomes a record. Let's take a look at the Engineering Projects Library, where I've added some content types. These content types were created at the site collection level and then added to the library. These content types are also added to the new document menu. Document is the default, but there are also content types for contracts, leases, and for specs. So what is a content type? A content type is basically a category of content that can have its own templates, its own properties, which some people call metadata, but basically it's just information about the file or the list item, and also other settings. Let's take a look at the Project Alpha specification file that has the spec content type applied to it. I'll edit the properties, and as you can see, the content type of spec has been applied, and there's an approval property, and its choices are pending, approved, and not approved. There's also a status property, which applies to the publishing status of the file. So these are properties that have been added to the spec content type. Now I'll click Cancel, and let's go see where the spec content type is set up for the site collection. I'll click on Settings, and then Site Settings, and then Site Content Types. Let's scroll and take a look at the spec content type. There are different actions that I can take with this content type, but let's click Information Management Policy Settings. And now let's define a policy. So for the administrative description, this is the description that administrators will see, or it will show up in a listing of policies. We collect a lot of drafts, and it's best to have those discarded after 3 years so we can kind of clear up our site. Now the policy statement is what users will see when they open the file. And it's usually a little bit longer. Now there are 4 actions that I can take with this policy. I can add retention actions, which is a series of stages that can happen to a file to help discard it or declare it as a record. With auditing, administrators can see who's modified or moved a file or taken other actions on a file. Barcodes actually insert a barcode in the printed version of a document so that the printed version can be compared with the version that's on the server. Labels are similar. You can insert a label that contains a property so that you can compare the printed version with the server version. Let's enable retention. And as you can see, there are different categories for non-records versus records. Because this content type and the files are not records yet, let's just add a retention stage to the non-record stage of this file. So this property is based on certain dates. It can be a time period after the file was created, modified, or declared as a record. I'm going to select Modified and say 3 years. So 3 years after the file was modified, let's take a specific action. There are 7 actions I can choose. So what I'd like to do is delete previous drafts. And then I'll click OK. Now I'll click OK to save the policy. Now let's go back to the Engineering Projects Library, and let's open that spec. Now we see this yellow bar that has the information management policy applied to it. It tells me, or whoever's working with the file, that drafts are discarded 3 years after the file is modified. So we've seen content types and information management policies, and we'll see more about how these features can be used with records later in the course.